You're listening to episode 230 of Mitolife Radio. I am Matt Blackburn, your host, and today I'm interviewing Caitlyn Hartigan of the Iron Protocol. This is Caitlyn's second time on the show. If you haven't heard that episode, definitely go back and listen to it because it's jam-packed with information about iron deficiency. And we kick off this show talking about the closed-mindedness that we've seen in the natural health community about iron and how it's actually harming people's health. So we talk a little bit about that and how there's this strong messaging out there in the mainstream health community that everybody is iron overloaded and or iron dysregulated, which Caitlyn and I disagree with. So we bring balance to that conversation and then move into talking about details about the prevalency of iron deficiency, how to measure it. She talks about iron infusions and why she's a fan of them, why iron is not just the quote unquote dumb waiter that carries oxygen around the body, why she's a fan of vitamin D and why she supplements herself. And then I ask her listener questions, including what are the functional ranges you consider appropriate to assess blood levels and values? Does iron not feed parasites? Digestive issues with supplemental iron? Which genetic markers to look at for people prone to deficiency? And a lot more. So enjoy the show. Here is Caitlyn Hartigan. Caitlyn Hartigan, welcome back to the show.
Hi there.
Hello. Yeah, this is going to be a fun second chat on iron and everything related to iron. A lot of people know me as the guy that's been talking about iron overload for the last several years. And I've actually been looking into it for probably 5 or 6 years. Like even before I started the podcast, I was aware of it. So it's been
real.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah, it's real.
But it's not the only iron issue. And it's my understanding it's actually related more to hereditary hemochromatosis than like this conspiracy to make everyone iron overloaded. Right?
Reminder, which I have the gene mutations for. I'm homozygous for them.
Right.
So that technically, in clinical terms, makes me, quote unquote, highly likely to develop overload.
And I think in the first show, you went into that deeply. So if for listeners, if you haven't heard our first show, go back and listen to that one just for, this is kind of expanding on the information in that previous show. Of course, we'll kind of go back and cover a little bit of it.
We go over a lot of fundamental basics in the first one. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And how I found you, Caitlyn, was through your Facebook group, the Iron Protocol. And that was when I was in the midst of the cult mentality that iron deficiency was a myth and it's not real and nobody's iron deficient and everybody is overloaded and they just have iron dysregulation and they're copper deficient or magnesium deficient and or retinol deficient and everyone needs to donate blood and all these different things that go along with that philosophy. And I realized that it was wrong. And we were talking about it before we started recording. I wanted to kick it off with this because people get on me and say, how can I trust anything you say, Matt Blackburn? Because you always are changing your mind and you were so adamant about iron overload and now you say it's overblown. Well, everybody that's going along and drinking the Kool-Aid from the iron overload cult is they're not looking into the sources that they're referencing. So Robert Crichton, they call the dean of iron biology on planet Earth. And person close to me emailed Robert Crichton and he replied that basically his work was being misrepresented and that's not what he's saying with regards to iron overload, that basically you have to have hemochromatosis to get iron overloaded. And if you don't, then it's not really an issue. So that's really interesting to me because a lot of people aren't looking into the sources, right? Because people write books and there's all these citations, like you were saying before the show, but who's looking into the citations? Exactly. Nobody. It's just, it's cited. It must be credible.
This
And
is
then,
such an important topic to go over right now
mhm,
because I'm a patient advocate and I've seen and I've been for a very long time chronically ill. I've seen thousands and thousands of people desperate for help and answers because they're not getting it from their doctors after seeing their doctors for years. So we're naturally turning to Google, and then you're seeing conflicting information. You don't know what to do. You're asking friends, and you somehow stumble across Facebook groups. And I've kind of been a professional Facebook group analyzer, analyst across many, many Facebook groups. And I see just thousands and thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people desperate to feel better. And they don't have the bandwidth mentally to use any discernment, common sense, critical thinking. And it's not a slight to them. That's not what I'm not speaking negatively of them. I'm speaking technically of what's going on in their brain. And they say, I'm tired. This is too much. I'm overwhelmed. I can't comprehend any of this. I'm having a hard time. That's why I would just go to my doctor because I trust that, and they're supposed to help me. I wish somebody would just tell me what to do. So I think there is a responsibility upon people with a level of influence and without a level of influence. I think we need to be very responsible and kind of a heightened level of I don't want to say anxiety about what we say, but of kind of being neurotic about it, like making sure you really are saying something that could potentially not harm someone. I'm seeing hundreds of thousands of people easily, and this is mind blowing to me, easily getting brainwashed because people are saying the same things. They're repeating what they've heard from a person of influence, or the person of influence is speaking so eloquently and knowledgeably. And, it gives the impression that they know what they're talking about. It gives the impression that they're experienced. That's why I think some of these people, I call them a master salesman because their words are so convincing. But if you look at the citations that they're citing and you read the sources yourself, if you're able to think clearly, which many of us are not, you're able to see yourself. This is what I did myself because I kept seeing conflicting information and I didn't want to just go off of what I heard because I couldn't afford it anymore health-wise. I was dwindling down so fast. But my point is it's hard for a person unwell to even have the bandwidth to click open the citations. And then when they read it, they're overwhelmed. They think it's a bunch of clinical terms, scientific mumbo jumbo, and they just have a hard time. But if you do read it objectively, you're not reading it hoping it says something. You're trying to read it for what it is, and you don't have a lot of brain fog. You don't feel overwhelmed. If you can understand it, or get the gist of it, a lot of times I have seen these sources not say what somebody is claiming the source is saying. And I'm seeing a huge problem with that. Now, I don't have a problem when somebody changes their tune on a point. For example, you changing your tune on iron, because that's showing objectivity, that's showing a lack of conflict of interest. And I have seen a conflict of interest in many, many things. I've even seen published articles that claim there's no conflict of interest. And you can tell, because I can read it clearly, that there's a conflict of interest. I can tell something's not true or it's even written poorly. But my point is you just don't know who to listen to. It's really hard to know who to listen to. So I tell everyone in my group, first of all, look for a conflict of interest. And if somebody is unwilling to listen to the other side and entertain a thought, that's showing me they have a conflict of interest. That's showing me they have an agenda of They want it to be about, let's say, magnesium. They want it to be about overload. They want as opposed to being objective. When we talk about negative points of iron or perhaps dangerous points of iron, we say, yeah, that's true. We're not saying that's not true. So you have to, as somebody unwell, you have to mindfully use discernment. You have to listen and look into what somebody's saying with intent to see if they're open to hearing what you're saying, open to listening. And there are a lot of people that show that they're not. So I think this is a really important point, because listening and changing your thought process actually shows a lack of a conflict of interest for me, which yields to more accurate information to me. So I can appreciate that. And I'm sure it's also been a learning moment for you of what we're talking about. Wow, I was brainwashed. Wow, I'm a smart guy, and I was repeating stuff that actually isn't true.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like, I think you mentioned conspiratorial, that term, before we started recording. And
Yeah,
my view of the world now is like, I think people
there's
think
a learning curve.
well, people think everything is conspiracy because you can go too far, where there are
Yeah.
definitely some things. I
That's why I
mean,
laugh when I talk about me saying I think that's a conspiracy, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and you can go too far up the deep end on that and think everything is. But I've seen plenty in this health realm now that I've been analyzing it for thousands of hours.
right. And with conflict of interest, I wanted to point out too, these online courses are often 3, 4, 5 grand to go through the
That's a great
motions
point.
of the different, you know, brainwashing. And
Right.
once a practitioner, someone becomes certified in that iron overload program,
Right.
if they change their tune on ascorbic acid, on zinc, on vitamin D, on iron, of course, then pretty much that they just wasted $3, 4, $5,000
Right.
on that
And they don't
course.
want to admit that. They don't want to face that. They don't want that to be real. I've seen that plenty of times. I think that's a great point you just brought up. I've seen a lot of consultants trained in certain ways that they spent thousands of dollars on master classes, um, and they do not want to hear your experience that nullifies what they're saying or invalidates what they're saying or contradicts what they're saying. They don't want to hear it. They'd rather tell you you're lying, basically. They would rather, they don't want to face reality that what they've been taught is not necessarily true, even though there may be many truths throughout what they have learned. But there can be a lot of false statements, flat out lies, or bad conclusions. And that's the thing, is you have to look into who's saying what and look at what they're saying in response to contradicting ideas or experiences. And you also have to pay attention and compare, especially if they're speaking about something you're experienced in. You have to start paying attention. I've seen some where I'm seeing them jump to conclusions, and it's giant red flags telling me they have no experience in this, or even something that I barely have experience in. And I can tell, oh my God, they have no experience in this, because my little experience in that particular subject, I already know that what they've just said is flat out false.
Yeah, the vitamin C is a fun one for me because
Right.
a lot of them say, it doesn't play well with iron, ascorbic acid, which is literally vitamin C. But then you look at like the cancer therapies, like the rodent clinic and the high dose vitamin C
Right.
therapies. That's a cancer cure. It's not the cancer cure. It's one option. If I had cancer, I would play with,
I would too.
hundreds and hundreds of milligrams of vitamin C, hundreds
Right.
of thousands. Yeah.
Right. A lot of people, talk about iron being bad and feeding cancer. Well, you also have to ask all the cancer patients and ask how many have gotten iron infusions. You also need it for your immune system. So I think that leads into a topic of fear mongering. I think right now, and we talked about fear mongering on our last podcast together. I think just like anything, fear sells, drama sells, sex sells. I think right now, fear mongering iron is sexy in marketing terms. It's gripping, it's grabbing people's attention. And I think it's a cheap marketing shot right now. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's hurting people, which is
It's hurting people.
why I wasn't afraid to change it. I'm like, okay, I'll take my reputation getting torn down for a year straight to, to bring this to light, this thing that can literally save a life.
Because you literally can't. You can literally. There's just too many fear mongering right now. There's just a major problem of people not realizing that they can put people in such immediate harm's way. Well, they need to think for themselves. Well, that's the thing. They're very unwell and they're having a hard time thinking for themselves. So,
right.
We've got to accept that component. I just see way too many people inexperienced in a topic, but speaking so strongly on it in a way that can harm so many people. This is such a relevant topic to me because iron deficiency is so extremely prevalent. It's an immediate issue for me.
Yeah, and I think the stats are what is it? I forget which government organization says like 80% of the world is iron deficient. And then I think people question that. They're like, oh, it's a government organization. I can't trust it.
I don't trust any government organization either. To tell you the truth, I've seen so many blatant conflict of interest.
But even a broken clock is right twice a day, right?
Well, and that's the thing with all of this. There are so many truths among what is being said, but there are some very specific points that are being flipped or said that are false, that are being made.
What I like about your
thinking hard. I'm exhausted, but I'm also thinking hard right now. I mean, it's just when you grasp the magnitude of the issue, it's very heavy.
I noticed when you respond to comments, like on my recent iron meme that I made, so like a funny one. You
and your girlfriend make the best iron memes. And I've already asked permission to steal them from my group. So I appreciate both. Thank you.
Yeah, you often tell people I haven't seen that, in enough people to comment on it. Someone asked about Shilajit and iron absorption. And I really respect that because how you kind of learn is through the Facebook group. You look at people's experiences and kind of get their feedback, and you even do polls. I think you mentioned that in our first show, that's often how you'll learn what's working for people in your different groups. You'll run polls and see how people respond.
I used to do some polls, but I more so just spend, tens of hours. I especially did years ago, spend over 10 hours a day reading every single post. It's more so reading every single bit of activity and engaging in the majority of that activity. It's a full-time job. And that's how I've learned. And that's how I've seen when certain published articles are total bullshit. Sorry. But that's when I've seen, or something from the CDC or the WHO. I'm like, okay, blatant conflict of interest right here, because I know for a fact for the majority of people it operates differently. I mean, it's too blatant and too obvious. It's obvious to me because I've spent, I think it's now over 8,000 hours analyzing people's experiences with iron deficiency, treating their iron deficiency, what they went through before finally being diagnosed or self-diagnosing. And it's not hard to diagnose yourself with iron deficiency. If your ferritin is under 30, it's a clinical absolute iron deficiency. Absolute meaning concrete. You don't have to look anywhere. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to look anywhere. In studies that show ferritin 30 and below, you don't have enough iron stores in your bone marrow. And creating new red blood cells is the most critical need for iron. And that happens through the bone marrow. So I know we've been talking a lot about non-iron. We haven't been speaking about specifics about iron, but I'm a patient advocate. And I think what we've been talking about is really important to go over because so many people are so unwell, especially if you've been suffering from iron deficiency and you just don't know who to listen to. You've been led down the wrong path for so long in so many different ways. And I tell everyone in my group, you need to consider the source. I tell everyone in my group, don't get brainwashed even by my group and by my guides. Don't get brainwashed by it. You're repeating. Some people will repeat one-liners, but they're using it in the wrong context, and specifics matter. Understanding context. There's a lot to this, but all of us, we live in a fast-paced life now, and especially if we're unwell, we just want to be told what to take. So my protocol is a little misleading because it's not necessarily a protocol. It's an environment for learning and taking in studies and articles, biology, and also taking in mass analysis and taking in all sorts of information to help you decipher how you want to go forward. It could go any way, and just help better empower you. The reason I called it a protocol is because you have to take it seriously, and especially if it's non-heme iron, you have to time it the right way or else it won't be really absorbed. So mine's a little misleading because it is very bio-individual. A lot of people like to say that term.
But you offer a starting point, like the modules. Like you often tell people, like, start here, and you just have easy to follow modules that people can go through. And then if they still need further support, then they can ask in the group,
right?
Which I think is great. And I think the ferritin thing you brought up, that's the point that got me, because like 3 years ago, I was convinced that wasn't an accurate marker because somebody told me so. And they said these authorities in science said that as well. And then I later look into those same exact authorities and they did not say that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, everybody's still parroting that ferritin is not an accurate marker of iron storage when it is.
It is. Yeah, it is across the globe proven and accepted that it reflects. It's a mirror image of what is reflected in your ferritin in your liver and or bone marrow, because the gold standard would be taking a biopsy of your bone marrow. But we've already established a ferritin serum of 30 and below. You don't have enough ferritin in your bone marrow. So, what have you got to say about that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't recycle iron if there's no iron to recycle, right?
I am so glad. I love when people quote me on that. What's there to recycle when you've got none to recycle? You can't leave out major issues that people are dealing with. Yes, there is an iron recycling system. It is very important. There are a lot of cofactors at play. Vitamin A, magnesium, copper, pretty much all of the B vitamins, manganese, molybdenum. Is that how you even pronounce it? I
think so.
Okay. I always like to reiterate too, I'm not medically trained. I'm not scientifically trained. I had to do this to save my life. And I've always had a lot of determination and a lot of conviction. So that's where this is all coming from. So you're going to hear a lot of layman's terms, but I think a lot of people with brain fog can appreciate that, kind of straight to the point with layman's terms. But there is a recycling system with lots of cofactors in play, even vitamin E. It's kind of like everything. It's kind of like basically every nutrient mineral in a way is necessary for it, plays with it. And you could be low in any of those, which can affect your iron recycling system. But if you're not absorbing iron because you don't have the right bacteria and you need to be on the right probiotics, or if you have an iron consuming bacteria, H. pylori, or if you have SIBO, SIBO, you're not absorbing a lot of different nutrients. There are some things that will affect iron more so than all other nutrients. What if you hemorrhage out? You're losing a lot of blood. You might need more blood. You might need a blood transfusion, but that doesn't mean you're low on copper and your iron. Your body needs a lot more iron to pump out new red blood cells. So what about that? Well, that doesn't really happen. Yes, it does. Some sort of crazy excuse they come up with or they ignore. So I don't mean to, I hope I'm not coming across ugly. I would like to just reiterate the point that I see a lot of people inexperienced on iron speaking on it. And unfortunately, it puts a lot of people in harm's way because iron deficiency is so prevalent. So anyone who finally listens and is open to listening, I very much appreciate. So like you said, you said, if it saves a life, I'm good. So I can respect that. I can appreciate that too, for sure.
I think in the first show, I started taking a break from coffee. I'm like a month off of it, and just switching to tonic herbs and stuff. And I think in the first show you said you were relying on caffeine, and it's kind of funny because coffee blocks, was it mostly non-heme iron
Right.
absorption?
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize like
the tannins in
okay.
coffee or teas, tannins specifically.
Meat actually contains some non-heme. It's not just 100% heme. That's a common misconception, right? And
right.
So,
right.
So yeah,
it'll block it. There's so much that blocks the non-heme. You're like,
so
I'm
iron
with my
if you're iron deficient, you probably want to take a break from coffee. I don't know, or watch out with the team.
At least if it's within a couple hour window of eating non-heme or taking your non-heme.
So wait after breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah, digestion. You don't have to totally cut it out. However, what is very interesting that I don't think many or any published articles and other people can speak to, some unique findings we've found. One of them in the iron protocol, I've found a handful of people who have totally cut out dairy, and it was finally what they needed to raise their iron and absorb. So maybe because they were so overloaded and they didn't have the right probiotics to digest the dairy, and it was just sitting in there longer, maybe affecting like all day consumption of iron, because calcium is interesting in that it affects both non-heme and heme iron. As far as we know, heme iron is only blocked by heavy calcium. And some articles you'll pull up say it doesn't. Well, then how come I see so many people, finally raise their iron on, cutting out heavy calcium or dairy as a whole? And then some published articles will say up to 150 milligrams would be fine with it. And then another one I've read says it's 300 milligrams of calcium or more will block non-heme iron. So I appreciate that you just acknowledged me saying, I don't know that because I'm not experienced in it. We don't see, doctors don't speak that way. And many of us would not be sick if the doctors would just be honest and say, I'm not really experienced in that specific point or this condition. I think you should go get other opinions. And I think you should ask their experience. I think we should be transparent with that. Because I've been led down a decades long poor health plan because of that. So, I try to make it a point to reiterate in my group, this is the learning environment. Part of the learning curve is to learn who you can listen to and whatnot. I get people that come in all the time, I'm exhausted from this. I keep hearing conflicting information. Who do I listen to? And I say, listen to yourself. You have to learn so many different things about iron to feel confident that you're doing something safe. We don't advocate for people to just start taking iron. We don't advocate for people to pump themselves with tons of iron, especially willy-nilly. And we also don't say that everyone needs iron. We don't think everyone is iron deficient. When I say it needs iron, I meant iron supplementing. So I think it's a very important point of being transparent in our experience when answering questions, because that's really what the person is implying in the question too, sometimes without them realizing. I've gotten good at speaking iron deficient, like kind of knowing what they're really asking, even though the words are different. So we say that a lot in the group. It's fine. I speak iron deficient. I know what you meant. So.
And you found another study recently that ferritin can sometimes act as an antioxidant, right?
Yes. This actually speaks to the point I was making before. There are very specific situations that we have to learn all about to be able to speak on them. So this was a published article I came across recently, and I did not memorize and wrap my head around every single point. So I did make a post about it in the group. And for everyone listening, it's called the Iron Protocol. Go ahead and make sure like it and follow on Instagram, on Facebook. So let me pull it up on my group. It's very interesting because I was surprised to see that. But I've seen so many things. I constantly tell everyone anything is possible. But I had never come across an article or anyone claiming it. Also, since everyone wants to fearmonger iron, I don't see anyone,
And ferritin specifically, because I've heard single digit, the ideal ferritin is potentially a 0. All of these things I've heard over the last couple of years.
Now, this is a great point also, but I'll go back to the antioxidant. But this is a great point to reiterate. People claiming that a ferritin of 0 or below 50 or below 30 is ideal are not experienced in iron deficiency and or healing from iron deficiency. So you have to, consider the source. I can tell you as a 100% fact, they are not highly or extremely experienced with iron deficiency. Why? Because we have seen, if you look at the data and you analyze all of this mass data, it seems to be, to just put it in layman's terms, it seems to be that the body decides how to spend its serum iron, how to spend its iron and send it to whichever enzymes to create over 180 biochemical processes. It seems to be that the body decides on how to spend its iron is based on how much it has in storage. And so I make the analogy of kind of like us, how we budget and ration. It's based on how much we know is incoming. It's based on how much we have in savings. If our wallet, if we just use cash and change as opposed to cards, if our wallet's empty for the day, does that mean we're broke? Maybe for the day, maybe in the moment, if you need to buy gas and you don't have any cash on you, but you're full of storage. But let's say you're full of savings. So, you could just pull some out of savings. Well, your body does that too. It pulls the iron out of savings when it needs it. It also will pull the iron out of, if you don't have as much in savings as the body wants it to have, it will also pull the iron out of hair and skin and nails, and it will go into the iron serum. And that's another reason why most of the time, even in a severe iron deficiency, most of the time your iron panel is in normal range. So that will be your iron serum, your transferrin saturation or iron saturation. Most of the time, that will be in totally normal range. This is why you cannot rely on iron serum or saturation right away for diagnosing iron deficiency. It can give a better picture of what's going on at times, not always. But that kind of leads me to another tangent. But let me jot it down because I want to speak back onto this antioxidant thing. But I do want to go on this tangent about, I just lost it. But I did take my iron today. It's because I haven't eaten as much. But I appreciate your grace because I got to tell you before we got on that I've been dealing with a lot of mental fatigue. I'm still healing from stopping my progesterone abruptly. So everyone out there, don't do that because it will make you brain dead. It'll come. I already forgot it. So let me speak on the antioxidant thing. I'm not trying to be as long-winded as I am being. So I apologize. I'll read this quote. It's not very long. Some of it might be a little wordy, but I'll reiterate the main point. I just made a post from a source from PubMed. It's called Intracellular Iron Transport and Storage from Molecular Mechanisms to Health Implications. And the quote is, accumulating evidence shows that ferritin acts as an antioxidant protein, with 6 citations for that. I don't know if I've ever seen that many numbers for a citation for a statement. So that was a good word. Accumulating evidence shows that ferritin acts as an antioxidant protein. Ferritin H is induced by NF, I don't know what KB means, in response to TNF alpha treatment, resulting in suppression of ROS and inhibition of apoptosis. When ferritin H was transgenetically overexpressed into Parkinson's disease model mice, reduced oxidative stress was found. So this is a very, very, very specific situation. So I found it to be very surprising. So I wanted to share it with the group. A lot of my group members, once they get through the brain fog, they're having fun really learning about different intricacies of iron and ferritin. And this was just very surprising to all of us because we hear so much fear mongering about iron. How interesting and surprising that it can be an antioxidant in some situations. And then it says, in addition, in another situation, it spells out, when certain cells stably transfected with tetracycline-induced ferritin H and L were forced to overexpress ferritin, the accumulation of H2O2 induced ROS was reduced. Oh, and then I don't know how to say that. Erythroleukemia cells. Okay. Murine erythroleukemia cells that overexpress ferritin H displayed lower levels of labile iron pool and ROS. So the reason I brought this to your attention earlier is because there's a very important point I want to make. When we talk about iron, there are so many dangerous situations, but there's also so many important, necessary, and needed situations by the body as well. You have to be focused on learning the concept, the context, and learning the very specific situation in which it's speaking of. I've seen some people say, oh, well, copper does this, copper does that, magnesium does this, magnesium does that, to a person asking a question in a group. For example, I've seen, my allergies are getting worse. What do you guys think? XYZ, seeing a post on that. And I'm seeing in a copper group, a copper admin saying copper fixes allergies. Well, copper may help allergies. It may even be documented, but we need to understand the specific situation and the point. And I really wanted to drive home the point of the dose. A lot of influencers, a lot of people learning from influencers and going across social media and making comments and answering or just making comments are not including the dose. We're kind of maybe excitably sharing information or maybe even lazily sharing information. And I don't mean to be a pain in the ass, but with iron, it kind of seems like you have to be a pain in the ass and learn all of these very specific situations, because guess what? Iron also helps allergies, but that doesn't mean you're not going to have any allergies if you just pump a bunch of iron in you. There's a lot to each biochemical process. There's a lot to what's going on in the body. So we can't just say, I'm mind blown at the amount of people that respond to admins or members or people commenting on Instagram that answer that. And then the person responds, okay. And I'm like, whoa, you're taking that? Okay, I'll take more copper. Okay, I'll take more iron. Okay, I'll take more magnesium. Whoa, we didn't discuss why it would help, to what extent it will help, measurement in the body. For example, restless leg syndrome is highly documented that it can be caused by ferritin below 75, below 100. So that's a very specific point. We know we've got a measurement for that. So we can't just say, oh, you got restless leg, raise your ferritin. Well, maybe their ferritin is at a very healthy level, and they've treated their iron deficiency and they're in recovery. Other things cause restless leg syndrome as well. So I wanted to kind of, I keep driving home this point, and I think it's important for us to talk about considering the source and how we're taking it. We're in an information age anyway. I think it's very important that we don't apply this fast lifestyle to our health. I think we need to be deep diving more and more, but a lot of us just don't have the bandwidth right now. So I understand it. It's just we need to be careful about how we answer things, and we need to be very careful about how we take information in. I've seen it. I am mind blown at the amount of people that are letting themselves get brainwashed or accepting poor insight or a lack of insight, and they're just taking it as fact. I think we're just
those are great points. Everyone has different deficiencies too, right? Like if someone took a ton of fish oil, they probably created a vitamin E deficiency because there's a seesaw relationship there. Or I was raised mostly vegetarian because I just didn't like meat. So I didn't get a lot of zinc, which is going to affect all these things. So it's like, I
like to say that the body is an ecosystem. Heavy dosing of one thing is going to put other things to work and therefore deplete them if you're not supporting it. Be supplementing or eating more of those foods. So sometimes I get consults from members in my group, and they'll say, "Don't be mad at me, Caitlyn. I'm not taking my calculated range from the protocol." And I say, "Why would I be mad at you? I'm not on this." And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm not on this crusade of everyone needs to take a bunch of iron. So I kind of laugh at any fear-mongering posts because nobody who's pro-iron is saying what these fear-mongering people are claiming we're saying. So anyway, but
yeah, there's a lot of misrepresentation happening. I mean, it happens with me. Matt's zero carb. No, I was playing with low carb, and I do play.
The good thing about social media is we can correct it, which I appreciate and engage, but also please stop misinterpreting what I'm saying, and please stop spreading it because you can put somebody in harm's way. Because a lot of people don't have that discernment or common sense or critical thinking right now when they're so unwell, which is why they end up in these groups and on these posts in the first place.
Yeah. And going back to what you said, like you were talking about serum iron and transferrin being oftentimes normal, even deficiency. I think one of the big things, or the main thing I learned from your iron group, is that there are stages to iron deficiency, because I had it in my head, there's just, overload or anemia. But with iron deficiency, there's like 3 stages before anemia, right? And you can have normal hemoglobin and still be very iron deficient.
Severely iron deficient to the point where it ruins your life. Like that's what happened with me. Yeah. So I think that's a major learning curve moment for the medical establishment to learn. Most doctors do not know that or accept it. They just don't realize. It is amazing how many members have told me, my doctor said your iron is fine if your hemoglobin's fine. My doctor said, as long as my blood panel is fine, my complete blood count or my full blood count is fine, that's all that matters. And that means that my iron is fine. And I'm like, do you realize how stupid that doctor is? And do you realize, like, if you're accepting that, like how stupid that is too? And I don't mean to call many people stupid. I'm talking about the concept. If we say it out loud, doesn't it sound really stupid? Because what that is saying is that the only purpose for iron is to create new red blood cells and hemoglobin. Even somebody who doesn't study the body should probably be like, really? That's it? That's the only thing that iron's needed for? Then why is it in prenatals? That if you just take a moment, I think we're all dealing with such a fast-paced lifestyle and a lot of brain fog. If you do stop and think about it, it's like, wait a minute, that makes no sense. So to reiterate something I said earlier, Iron is in charge of tens of enzymes that are responsible for over 180 biochemical processes. So that is more than the one process of creating new red blood cells. So that means that's a lot of compromises for the body to make. Now, on the sugar note, there has been a published article we came across relatively recently that goes over how the body apparently uses glucose in replacement of iron in certain processes.
Interesting.
When you're iron deficient.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's like a relationship too to where you live. So living south versus in northern latitude, I've been eating local fruit that's been grown probably, an hour south in Mexico from me.
Right.
Like I feel great, and I think there's something to eating with increased sunlight, whereas up there in Idaho probably wouldn't have made sense to eat mangoes like I'm eating now, or but yeah, I think there's same thing with polyunsaturated fats. Some people make the argument with that in colder climates it's antifreeze, so you should probably up your polyunsaturated fatty acids in colder, but in tropical climates maybe more saturated or something. So anyway, kind of a little tangent, but
right.
But yeah, that's interesting about the glucose. It's definitely been one of those things that's been heavily demonized, but I also think we can't go all the other way too and say,
right. We don't need to be extreme on anything regarding the body. We don't need to be in our views. Anything. I've seen so many unprecedented things happen, so many unexpected things happen from people sharing their stories that I 100% believe anything is possible. But the glucose part, when I posted about it in the group, it rang kind of funny to a lot of us because for a couple of notes, I used to eat a ton of candy, a ton. And I used to think, I bet this is unhealthy because I eat a lot of candy, but I feel slightly better. I feel fine, relatively speaking, for what I would assume you would feel if you eat a bunch of junk food. And so it was kind of funny because it's like I was literally fueling my body at the time. But then the other point that we all thought was kind of funny, everyone's like, is that why I'm craving sweets? Is that why I crave it so much? And we do know it's been documented that when you're low in certain things, it's because your body's craving it. But the interesting thing about being iron deficient is not only can it cause pica. I like to say pica because I'm from South Texas, so I'm Hispanic by cultural birth. So I naturally, when I read it, I say pica, but it's pica. Do you remember what that is?
Yeah, it's a craving like dirt.
Right. Non-food.
Right.
Non-food items. So it especially happens when women are pregnant. Why? Because iron is required for growth and development, and your baby is draining you of iron. That's a sign you're already iron deficient, let alone becoming iron deficient. So the craving point on a side tangent about that is pretty funny because it may not, it could be that you're craving the glucose because your body is telling you it needs some sort of energy. However, what's interesting about iron deficiency is when you have it, it can cause pica, which is an uncontrollable craving for non-food items. A common one is ice. A lot of people have tens of thousands of dental work because they've cracked all their teeth. We've normalized it too much. I buy my Sonic ice. I love it. I chew on it every day at work. You really need to check your ferritin. A lot of people don't know that. I've talked to my doctor, I've talked to my dentist, and they said it's fine, it just happens. Some people are like that. No, you need to check your ferritin. The medical establishment and the layman's person doesn't know. You need to check your ferritin. Everyone needs to check your ferritin every year. Children, women, and men. Everyone needs to check it. Ice is common. Dirt is common. Especially you hear that pregnant women craving dirt. We've had pica doesn't seem to be extremely prevalent in those who are iron deficient. It's just if you do have pica, it's usually likely because you're iron deficient. I've even seen people in my group tell me they were craving licking the pavement. And maybe it's because you want the minerals, you know? Somebody else was posting, and I've posted it before in my group, My Strange Addiction on TLC. How crazy and entertaining. They're eating toilet paper. They're eating laundry detergent. That's not funny. That actually is very serious. I'm quite sure if that person was in their right mind, they wouldn't like that. Their quality of life is suffering. Check your ferritin. Everyone on My Strange Addiction needs to check their ferritin. I'm not saying everything's related to low ferritin. It's just extremely likely, and it's extremely prevalent. But what's interesting about iron deficiency, it can cause pica, these uncontrollable cravings for non-food items. But what we have seen in the group is it also commonly causes uncontrollable cravings for certain food items, whether it be sweets, salty foods, carbs. It's commonly not red meat, sadly, because that would be very, very helpful. But we have seen a handful of folks say that, but it's not as common as I would like it to be. So on that tangent, there's a little factoid for you.
Interesting.
Talk about iron. So it's very interesting. I used to have carbs at the end of the day or sweets. And when you are healing from your iron deficiency, it's very common for members to come back and say, oh my God, I used to have this at the end of the day, or have this, several times a day. And I'm fine now. I don't
Wow.
think about it. And I just realized it's been 3 days without eating a pack of gummy bears, So
Wow. That was probably me.
Entertaining.
I grew up on candy too. Halloween, it was like pillowcases, like 1 or 2 pillowcases for Halloween. And now I could, I don't crave it. Even like healthy candy, which I was experimenting with here and there.
Oh yeah.
Like now I don't even crave that. And it's like, maybe it's because I was substituting because I barely got any iron in the first couple decades.
Maybe you needed the glucose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in substitution for the iron. That's how I was. And we all know kids love candy. And there are other things that can cause cravings too. Hormones being off, but your hormones can also be affected by iron as well. So for anyone and everyone listening, please, I really want to reiterate, I hope your takeaway is not that I'm making everything about iron, because it's not. I still deal with my own health stuff that I'm figuring out. And I'm on my 4th year of recovery from iron deficiency. And nothing, there isn't one thing that applies to everyone that is everyone's problem. That I see when we were talking earlier about misinterpreting what we're saying, I have seen that said about our group. And I've even seen newcomers come in my group and say, well, Caitlyn, not everything is related to low iron. Oh, thank you. Okay. I had no idea as I sit here dealing with my other health issues. I appreciate it. So I know I'm being sarcastic. I did see someone sent me some feedback on our last podcast, and they're very RCP based and copper based. They had a couple of bones to pick, but they were still very RCP and copper based. And somebody sent me some feedback, and they said she sounded really smug. And so I would hate to come off unlikable, especially because I think my message is very important, and especially because it applies to the masses. But if I sound smug about iron, it's because I'm right. And there are people being put in harm's way about iron, and I'm fiercely advocating for it. And so I might be a little smug on that. I don't know. If I don't know if smug's the right word, but yeah, I'm self-righteous about it too. So I just want to make sure the takeaway is not that everything is related to iron, because it's not. The body's an ecosystem. Everything's important.
That's part of like the PSYOP messaging. It's like this or that. Like it has to be this extreme or that extreme. And I think that's very popular, like you said earlier. And so people easily fall into that. So when someone like you or I come around and it's balanced, like, yeah, iron overload exists, but also iron deficiency exists.
Right.
That can't be. It has to be one or the other.
Right. No, it can be. And you can join my group and you can see lots of people that show it in real life. So you don't have to listen to anyone. You can do your own analysis. That's one of the things I love about these Facebook groups.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of pros and cons with social media.
Yeah. We have so many great questions I want to get into,
Awesome.
but first, I don't know if anyone asked about iron infusions, maybe one. I had a recent show where I interviewed a woman and she was against them. She said, she's never seen them benefit someone or something like that. But you're a fan. You've seen people benefit from
Right.
women, mostly from iron infusions, right?
Yeah, we say women mostly only because most women are iron deficient. But right now, I checked recently, we have over 5% men in my group. It's raised. I have seen that a couple of times. I've seen people say, I had an iron infusion and it ruined my life. They should be illegal and no one should be getting them, which is a very extreme, that's the one end of an argument. That's a total extreme argument because it's an absolute. Right now, the only absolute I believe in is Ferritin of 30 below is absolute iron deficiency. I've seen some people say, I've had an iron infusion, it didn't do anything. I don't feel any different. I've had an iron infusion, it ruined my life. Again, the main point is dose. That's the first thing we always need to bring into the conversation. Well, what dose did you have? That matters. Right now, what we see consistently for most people is they need about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of iron. Their dose needs to be 1,000 to 1,500 typically in total. So it doesn't have to be in one dose. It can be spread out in a relatively close time frame, depending on which product, which infusion. Dose matters. I've seen some people say they didn't feel any different. And then I engage and I ask the dose and they say, well, I got it from my naturopath. It was 20. I said, well, that's going to raise your ferritin 20. You're starting out with a ferritin of 10. So within that week, your ferritin is going to be a 30. And shortly after, it's going to die down a little bit. And it might level out around a ferritin of like 12. It stays high and then it dwindles, it normalizes and goes down a little bit. And especially if you have ongoing causes, that's the next point. A lot of people will say, I had iron infusions, they didn't do anything, and my ferritin was even lower afterwards. Well, do you have ongoing causes? It's like holes in a bucket, and you're trying to fill a bucket of water. If you have holes in the bottom of the bucket, the water's going to keep seeping out. So that's important. And the time frame in which you recheck your levels. If you check it immediately afterwards, your ferritin is really going to move to the number of your dose, really. It usually is. But if you give it a good length of time and you have ongoing causes, it's going to normalize and your causes are going to deplete your iron stores too. So it actually is a lot of this iron deficiency of understanding how it works. It makes sense. It's actually very simple. Like I said, holes in a bucket. It's just, there can be so much to it. It can feel very overwhelming for almost everyone, but it ends up being very, very simple. So the iron infusion point, dose matters. If you fix your causes or not, length of time from checking your ferritin matters. Separately from that, main overall point, this applies to every nutritional marker in every form of supplementing, whether it's oral, patches, infusions. If you heavy dose with anything, it's going to put other things to work and deplete them. So I've seen people say iron infusions ruined my life. Iron infusions caused me these other issues that I didn't have before. And it's like, well, you likely depleted a cofactor. We see with iron, the most direct cofactors are vitamin D and B12, the most immediate and direct. So the moment you start heavy dosing with iron, usually your vitamin D and B12 are going to be put to work through those same biochemical processes. and you're going to deplete them amongst many other cofactors. Iron seems to deplete everything. Iron, I mean, it's responsible for so many things. It seems to work with everything. So you can deplete your whole system potentially. So that's a major point. And thirdly, so we had our first points of dose, length of time, and if your causes are fixed. Second major point, depleting cofactors, which applies to supplementing as well. Third major point would be issues like anaphylaxis and hypophosphatemia. Really, hypophosphatemia is depleting the phosphate. You could say that's point two. Anyway, but those are very serious reactions that are relatively immediate. The anaphylaxis is immediate, but when you go to an infusion center, the nurses are trained for that. A lot of times it's already in a hospital. I have some members that say, now that I've learned about that, Caitlyn, I really only want to do it in a hospital. So God forbid anything happen, they can cart me right over there, wherever I need to go. And some people are really, really worried about anaphylaxis. To me, people are allergic to peanut butter. They're allergic to any type of food. It's kind of, arguably trying any new food is a risk. You don't know how you're going to react to it. You could have a allergy to it, a deathly allergy that you had no idea. But that goes for any medications as well. It happened. It's a real risk, and it's up to you if you want to try it. But you think about it, anaphylaxis, that applies to almost everything. And it happens. It's scary. Obviously, it's a huge problem. So that is a risk. And then hypophosphatemia usually develops around the fourth day, give or take, of after the infusion. Hypo meaning low, phosphatemia meaning phosphate. So I believe it causes some renal wasting of phosphate. And that is very scary and very dangerous. You usually end up going to the hospital around day 4, day 5, because you feel like you're dying. Air, hunger, can't breathe, heart palpitations to the point of you think you're dying. And it's terrifying. And much of the time it takes months and months to recover from. It's awful. It can be 10 times, 100 times worse than somebody's iron deficiency. It is hell on earth. So that is a risk. Injectifer is the one with the highest incidence rate. There's so many other options, and insurance usually covers multiple products of infusions. There's Ferritin, Venifer, Monifer has the lowest incidence rate of hypophosphatemia. There's kind of no reason for people to get Injectifer at this point, considering the incident rate is so high. It's like, why even do Injectifer? I had Injectifer twice. I was fine. Plenty of people have Injectifer and they're fine, but hypophosphatemia is hell. So plenty of people opt for a different one. And what we've also seen is if you already have somewhat low or low phosphate, and if you have low vitamin D, we do see it increase the risk of hypophosphatemia. So I have that within my guides that you want to check phosphate and vitamin D before getting an infusion. It's not a guarantee that you're not going to develop hypophosphatemia, but we've seen it happen more often with the lower vitamin D than it happening if you have a much higher vitamin D, for sure. So it can make you feel a little bit better, but maybe you don't want to get an infusion with lower vitamin D, especially because it's going to lower your vitamin D anyway. And right. What we see with healing from iron deficiency is you could fix your ferritin, but if you still have low vitamin D, it weighs everything down so heavily. It's hard to feel the benefits of healing and fixing your iron deficiency. It's kind of like walking with a weighted and wet blanket all over you. It's harder to move, harder to push. Everything's heavier. Life is just much harder. So
vitamin D is one of those things that's also demonized along with vitamin C and zinc.
Right. which makes me roll my eyes and perhaps sound smug at times because I have consistently seen hundreds of thousands of people feel better from raised vitamin D for years. So I can't comprehend, I can't logically put two and two together in my brain that you're supposed to have lower end vitamin D. It doesn't, the math don't math. It ain't math.
Yeah. And even if someone lives in a sunny area, there are genetic mutations that can prevent them from making vitamin D from the sunlight, right?
Especially if you have VDR TAC like I do, I'm homozygous for it. There's also VDR BSM, VDR standing for vitamin D receptor. So you can try to work on opening up those receptors. I still seem to have issues on that. But I grew up in South Texas, outside all the time, playing tennis and fishing for my dinner. And I always had a vitamin D around 30, 28 to 31, always. And all my doctors said, it's right on the line, you're fine. I had no clue my quality of life could substantially skyrocket if I maintain it higher. It's argued among so many, even pro vitamin D people, it's argued that optimal vitamin D is 60-ish, 80-ish. A lot of people say it's up to 100 ngml US units. The research I've done on VDR TAC, it's like a built-in dopamine deficiency. It sucks. It's not cool. It's not fun. The research I've done on that states that those, especially homozygous VDR TAC, need to maintain their vitamin D storage around 100. And that's where I maintain mine. And I get significant quality of life symptoms if I let mine drop to 85. My circadian rhythm's all off. My cravings are worse. My hormones are worse. Everything's worse. So vitamin D, yeah, it's so controversial. But the truth is we can't be making blanket statements. Ooh, vitamin D, bad. Let me fearmonger. We can't be making blanket statements that vitamin D supplements are bad for you. Not necessarily. For some people, it's dire. So please don't say that. You can affect people without even. I'm sure you don't mean to affect people negatively. I'm sure you're not even trying to put people in harm's way. But statements like that are very dangerous. I can't raise it from the sun because I have VDR TAC gene mutations. I can't. I always say, though, that everyone's got a different optimal level. Anything's possible. So your optimal can be around 60. Your optimal can be around 80. Anything's possible. You don't have to blindly listen to anyone. You can get a grasp of the context and pay attention to how you feel and your blood work. But back to that infusions point you were making or asking, somebody had asked about the infusions being bad. I've engaged with a lot of people that have said they've ruined my life. I would never do them again. They should be banned and illegal. Please, nobody should be saying that because the same dangerous thing that was dangerous for you is life-saving for many other people. We've seen people stop their seizures because of iron infusions. A lot of people can't absorb iron. They have to have iron infusions. If you're pregnant and you don't have sufficient iron within the first trimester, there's a published article that says that the baby, once born, basically can't regain lost IQ points from not having sufficient iron in the first trimester. So iron infusions can be risky. They can give you side effects. I've even seen constipation and stomach issues, which that stinks from iron infusion. But I've engaged with many people who are anti-iron infusions, and I've asked them, what was your vitamin D number before infusions? What's it now? What was your phosphate number before and after? What's your B12? Even those basic foundational ones, although there are many other cofactors involved that it can drop and somebody can suffer from, but those basic ones, pretty much every single person has said, I don't know, I haven't checked them.
Wow.
So when we're anti-iron infusions, there are some very important components that I just went over. And I know I went over it quickly, even though I'm long-winded. there's more information there. It's spelled out in the iron infusions post in the treatments guide in my group, so people can reflect back to that. But just knowing that, what I went over in that post, you're so much more informed, and your doctor typically will not know any of that. We had someone share, I don't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
We had somebody share recently that their doctor said, nah, it's not possible for iron infusions to give side effects. That's all.
Wow.
I just wanted to put that in there before I let you speak on your own podcast.
No, that's great stuff. Yeah, you said everyone has a different like optimal.
I can.
And is that because one of the questions that people send in to jump into those, like, what are the ranges you consider appropriate to assess blood labs and values? Is ferritin the one where, like for example, me, the last time I checked my ferritin, it was a 68.
Okay.
I think it's been hovering around that for years when I've been checking for the last 5 years. But say, man or woman, say they're not feeling like they had as much energy as they used to have. Does the ferritin vary based on, how someone feels and where they operate best at?
If you Google the definition of iron deficiency, it says low iron stores, which is ferritin. And you look at the diagnostic standards, it will tell you anything under ferritin anything under 100 in serum ferritin. And the units are universal. Across the globe, everyone uses the same units. So we can say numbers here. Anything under 100 can be an iron deficiency. So it can cause you symptoms. It can be an issue. Any ferritin 30 and below that's no question. That's a clinical, quote unquote, absolute iron deficiency. So a 68, you can be iron deficient at that number. You can have symptoms at that number. And some people feel fine at a 68, which is fine. That's fine. People who have overloaded before, people who have genetic hemochromatosis or secondary hemochromatosis, iron overload and hemochromatosis are the same thing. They can be used interchangeably. If you want to specify that one was genetically caused, you call it genetic hemochromatosis. But anyone who has overloaded before, they often feel best and better if they keep their ferritin maintained around 30 to 50-ish. I've even seen some people who claim they feel better with a ferritin around 11. But that's because they've overloaded before. So it changes something in the body. It changes how everything works. Oh, Lucas says hi.
I was wondering what that was in the background.
I make no promises when I'm on your show. How it's going to go. I'm sorry.
So another question we had was about parasites, Caitlin. This is a common
Good
one.
question.
Does iron not feed parasites? I'm scared to take it. Ferritin is a 3, though.
Iron can feed certain parasites and bacteria and viruses. Do you have them? Do you have what iron feeds on? Most people say, I don't know. So, especially if you're in a first world country, if you're suffering so badly from iron deficiency, especially with a ferritin being bottomed out like that at 3, that's very dangerous. You can start having seizures at that number, even before that number. I mean, God forbid that happens while you're driving a car. I mean, that's dangerous. Heart palpitations, that's a lot of compromises the body is having to make. It's trying to operate when it doesn't have sufficient minerals. It doesn't have the fuel it needs. So that's a very, very dangerous number. The risks on that, what we have seen overall, because that's a valid question, especially from all the fear mongering about iron feeds parasites. It does. The risks outweigh the benefits. The benefits outweigh the risks on that. The risks don't make sense to be so worried about if you have a bottomed out ferritin, especially if you can't function. There are people out there that say, oh, my ferritin's been an 8 for years and I can function. Sometimes they're self-medicating and they don't even realize it, or they're handling it in ways they don't even realize it. But then some people do feel fine until you crash. We've seen a lot of people in my group say, I was fine too until I crashed. So there's a published article that goes over a certain area in Africa has a lower incidence rate of malaria, and it's because they're so iron deficient. So that's relevant there. But if you're in a first world country, we're not really worried about malaria, right? And they need to worry about malaria over there. But you need to look at your own lifestyle and so, because some of us can't afford to suffer any longer. And so what we've never seen people explode of parasites from taking iron in my group. We have not. I think it's wise to get tested for causes and cofactors necessary for iron transport, especially before supplementing. But getting tested for SIBO and H. pylori are great ones to start out with if you're worried about feeding iron. Those are bacteria and parasites. So maybe you feel better supplementing if you test those out first to see if you have the most common types of parasites that feed on iron.
Awesome. At what level of ferritin does increased iron absorption stop for women?
I was thinking about that. That was one that stuck out when you sent a couple of questions over yesterday, because it doesn't really work like that. So can you read the question again?
Yeah. At what level of ferritin does increased iron absorption stop for women?
There isn't a number, because it doesn't work like that. Because, you could have had a hefty, healthy level of a ferritin of 200, and you have an ongoing cause and it's depleting rapidly, and you're now at a ferritin of 115, your body could be recognizing that and trying to increase its absorption sites. And that's a relatively healthy number, 115. So it doesn't work like that. It is documented that pregnant women, their absorption increases. There's a couple of documented instances where their absorption increases, but it's not enough to fix a deficiency. It's not. So read that question again, because it's hard for me to grasp that question, because the question doesn't really make sense, but I also can see if they read something like what I just referred to, why they would ask that question. Can you read it again?
Yeah. At what level? So what number of ferritin does increased iron absorption stop for women?
It doesn't work like that. I'm trying to find
a pretty good answer.
I'm trying to find the question they're really meaning to ask too. It doesn't work like that, but look at I'm gonna go on a limb and tell that person to focus on their saturation. If they're asking what I am inclined to think what they mean. Guide 3C in my group is really helpful for that. So that might help the person.
Okay, awesome. Supplementing iron makes my digestion more painful. Should I try a different kind?
Yeah, and you should entertain a probiotic that's got the right strains for iron digestion. Supplementing iron and treating iron deficiency just sucks. It does. For most people, it really sucks. It causes a lot of constipation for most people, and stomach painful cramping. It sucks. It's not fun, which is why you should monitor your ferritin to try to prevent it. But if you aren't tolerating an iron supplement, thankfully there are so many options now, and we have more answers now. Much of the time, when we see folks asking that same question in the group, and then they've tried a probiotic, I've had a lot of those folks come back the very next day and say, hey, Caitlyn, I tried a probiotic. I'm totally fine immediately now. Like magical.
Wow.
Really entertaining, really cool and exciting. So try a different iron and try a different probiotic if you're not on a probiotic.
Great. Which genetic markers to look at for people that are prone to iron deficiency?
That one was entertaining too when you sent that one over. There is a gene mutation that is more concentrated in Greek ancestry, heritage. And I can't remember it, but it's got issues with, I think, loading into storage. So there are some different gene mutations. There is one I pulled up last night. There's also arguably thalassemia gene mutations, but there was one ferroportin disease. So it is FPN1. It's got to do with transferring iron from the intestine and macrophages and placenta into the bloodstream. So if you have an issue with that gene, it can cause issues. It can cause iron to be trapped in the tissues too. So FPN1 is one of them. But like I said, I speak iron deficiency. I'm trying to find out why people are asking this question. The reason I see that question being asked or that topic being talked about in my group most of the time, because there are some people with very specific gene mutations, like the Greek one I was referring to that I can't remember. I think it's like a T, starts with a T. But a lot of people will come to the conclusion, it must just be genetic because my mom had it, my grandma had it, all my aunts. Most of the time it's not genetic. It's because most women become iron deficient. So when we're starting out learning about all this, we're like, I guess it's just genetic. My whole family has it. Even the boys. Well, most women are becoming iron deficient from their periods every month, and then they get pregnant. The iron is required for growth and development. They deplete their iron. They have the baby. They never become iron replete. They go on, luckily, because iron is required for fertility and full-term babies as well. They go on to luckily have more children, and then these children are born with the iron deficiency. And then it's not caught for however long, most of the time. We have a substantial amount of people in the group that say, I have been iron deficient my whole life. I'm realizing, based on all the symptoms, and it's very obvious that my entire life, and this wasn't caught until I read your guides. So, there are some gene mutations. I don't know all of them.
Yeah, I think I looked into the dimethyl transporter. It's like SLC 11A1 and A2. And I had some mutations in those.
You did?
Yep. Which is
has it affected you in any way?
I believe so. From my research, it said it could either cause anemia or overload or both.
Yay. Ambiguity. Yeah.
Right. So
well, and that's the thing, that question too, since iron interacts with so many other processes, it's needed by all the cells, and it's in so many different biochemical processes. There are so many other nutrients and minerals required for safe iron transport. You could go down the rabbit hole and, you could really think about it and all of a sudden make connections. It's possible all the gene mutations could affect it. I don't know. You can make connections, if you've got a copper issue, a copper gene mutation. Copper is required for iron transport. So directly or indirectly,
right.
Really.
It gets complicated. Yeah. Are iron tests reflective of tissue iron? Because this is the thing that I've heard over the years is, the iron tests are going to show how much iron is stored in your tissues. And Dr. Mercola just had a show on this. I think it was earlier this year or late last year or something. And there's a lot of talk about, iron stored in the tissues.
Right. That topic upsets me that he's just doing that, because that's so irresponsible to just all of a sudden fearmonger iron like he's doing. So the question is there...
Yeah, do iron tests reflect the amount of iron stored in your tissues? Like, it's my understanding ferritin does.
Not necessarily. The real way to test for if there's iron in your tissues is to take a biopsy of that tissue. Now, some tissues are made up of a lot of iron, like hair. But really what we're worried about is unbound iron in tissues. Like your liver is where a lot of your ferritin is, but that's bound in the protein of ferritin. So that's safe storage there. The iron panel and ferritin they're not necessarily a reflection of what's in your tissues. It's not like that. However, transferrin is the transporter of iron. That's how we safely transport iron around. It has, quote unquote, a high affinity to unbound iron. It is running around scavenging, looking for unbound iron, like a magnet. We only have so much transferrin. So that can come on the iron panel as well, your actual transferrin number. You don't really have to look at it, because what's most important is the capacity, is the occupancy, is if what we really need to care about is safely transporting iron, that means iron is unsafe when it's not transported correctly, because then that would be unbound. So if what we need to focus on is safely transporting iron, we know transferrin is the transporter, and we only have so much transferrin. How much at any given time, because this fluctuates throughout the day, how much at any given time are we safely transporting iron? If you're fasting, there's a lab result range for that. It varies because of what lab ranges are. They're glorified averages of a sampling pool, at least in regards to a lot of the nutritional markers. Usually it's around 20 to 50%. And remember, that is transferrin saturation, not iron saturation. It's transferrin saturation, saturation like occupancy, put to use, put to work. So let's say we have 400 transferrin in our body. That doesn't really tell us much. We want to know if we're safely transporting iron. Let's say we're fasting. The safe range, arguably, is 20 to 50%. If we have 20 to 50% of our transferrin currently in use, transporting iron safely where it needs to go. So if you're fasting and you have a high transferrin saturation rate, that could be reflective of the transferrin having a high affinity to the unbound iron and grabbing it out of your tissues, and thus being occupied, and it reflecting in that result. So I do see some people saying there's no way to test this mystery unbound iron in your tissues. Arguably, you know how to interpret the iron panel. Arguably there is, or there can be, but you have to understand how to comprehend the iron panel, and it's over a multi time, you have to test it multiple times and analyze it. So if you ask a bunch of people with hemochromatosis, they will tell you the diagnostic standards for overload. It's mainly high transferrin saturation, because that saturation's grabbing on to all this unbound iron, and you never want to be at max capacity 100%. That's dangerous. But it's especially over multiple tests showing a regular issue with that. So if you have a fasting transferrin saturation percentage being high, it could also be from having issues with cofactors responsible for iron transport, maybe potentially causing overload. So arguably you can use that test to look at if maybe how likely it is that you're overloading and that you have unbound iron stuck in your tissues. Was that
That's great.
enough?
That was awesome. And kind of circling back too, I should have asked this earlier with vitamin D. As far as the reference ranges, like I had Dr. Carolyn Dean on the show, and she is a huge magnesium advocate, but she's also a vitamin D advocate, which is great because usually it's one or the other.
Right.
But she's a big fan of vitamin D over, I think it's 80 nanograms per milliliter or something, but everyone has their own, ideal range. The last time I was tested, I was like 22, which is low by a lot of standards.
How did you feel?
Okay, but it was the middle of winter, I believe. So, kind of in hibernation mode anyway. So.
I see there are some people like my aunt that we just got her numbers back, and I know her very well. She has such a great attitude and tries to be positive. A lot of people with low end or low vitamin D who try to have great attitudes and mindsets, they also don't realize that they're compensating for the fact of how harsh the low vitamin D is on your mind. Because I've had to analyze so many different nutritional deficiencies, vitamin D is very unique in how it affects the mind, because all of these deficiencies will cause anxiety and depression, basically, any of them, but they can manifest a little differently. And with the vitamin D deficiency, it's a very dark, cruel manifestation. I've come across plenty of people that say, that's how I know my vitamin D is lowering, because my bipolar is far less manageable when it drops. So I see your cheery, positive attitude, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm laughing because sometimes people don't realize how sometimes people can combat as much as possible how dark the low vitamin D can be on the mind. It can be excruciatingly dark, even getting like paranoid as well. So a lot of gamers that are conspiracy theorists, I'm like, I really want to check your vitamin D. You're in your basement all the time, no sunlight. So I'm going to pour a cup of water while I'm talking to
you. Interesting. Yeah, that's such a deep topic with the whole vitamin D thing. That's one I've delved into a lot, with the storage versus active and supplementing. Yeah. And like everything, my view on it now is it's highly individual. So
it is.
It could be toxic to one person, but then medicine to another person.
And I think when anything can be toxic to one person, I keep finding much of the time it's because they're low on a cofactor required. It's a cofactor. It is required. They're low on a cofactor and don't realize it. So, of course, too much of anything is bad. That's what the context means of too much.
Well, I saw a recent Stephen Gundry video, the lectin guy, and he was talking about his supplementing vitamin D, and he said when he's not feeling good, he takes like 100,000 a day. He was just like, so there are some people that say it's extremely safe to megadose, which is interesting.
Yeah, 100,000 a day is usually the minimum for when you have COVID. 50,000 is what a lot of people take when they feel the onset of a cold. Have you ever heard of the vitamin D hammer?
Mm-mm.
Oh my God, I thought I was living under a rock, and I know you're not. So it makes it feel better. But especially when COVID started coming around and people were talking about the vitamin D needs when you have it, I saw hundreds and hundreds of people say, yeah, we did the vitamin D hammer growing up. My parents did it. Now I do it with my kids. It's at the onset of a cold. You feel it coming. You take 50,000 IUs. and some zinc and some magnesium too, but you do it for like 3 to 5 days. And I saw so many people say it knocks it out for me every time, you know? So I thought I was living under a rock when I saw so many people across multiple platforms say that. So that was really cool. So you just kind of soup that up for COVID because you need the defense, the vitamin D.
And it works with iron and with B12 as well. So, but it's interesting because B12 has a relationship with lithium.
Right. Right. Do you ever take the lithium orotate?
Oh yeah. For years, been experimenting with it, and it's definitely the strongest mind altering supplement I've taken.
What dose do you take when you're feeling the mind altering effects?
I think I've experimented with 50 or 60 milligrams a day.
Okay. A day throughout the day?
Yeah, kind of split up usually. But
I've really only seen some people do like 5 to 10 milligrams, 15.
Yeah, there's a lot of scare stuff about it, which it's hard to kind of decipher the truth and all of that. But, because
I don't believe anything anymore unless I vet it out amongst real life people. I really I don't believe anything anymore.
Right. Well, we covered a lot of ground, Caitlyn. So I think between our first show and this one, I think we'll get a good idea of, I know the other side.
Long-winded tangents, but if you really want to learn the point, rewind, listen again.
Well, it's great. Yeah, I know there's so much information, and your Facebook group, the Iron Protocol, great resource, especially just reading through the modules, so you can kind of get
thank you,
the information pretty efficiently there. You don't have to search through the group and find your answers. So
yeah, it's pretty organized. It can seem overwhelming at first, but I made a table of contents and everything. We're still working on the book. I had to pause because I went brain dead from no progesterone. So I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's always fun. So we'll have to do it again at some point. There's always more questions, and I feel like this is just one of those things that people have to hear over and over again.
I agree,
especially now with big people like Mercola coming out and speaking, out against iron, basically saying basically everywhere it's iron overloaded. I think there needs to be more of the opposite information to kind of counterbalance the extreme approach.
I agree. And thank you for going on that fight, that countering that. I think that's a great idea. I think it's important, especially just considering it affects so many people. So I had a good time. I like hanging out with you and hearing the questions and whatnot. But I hope everything I've gone on my tangents of, I hope they'll be helpful to some folks.
It was awesome. Yeah, good timing.
And Lucas says hi. Lucas
is coming back.
Mine and, all right. Mine and Karen, and just they want to communicate too. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Caitlyn. Stick around as we close out the show.
Awesome.
That wraps up today's show. I love that Caitlyn's going against the grain with sharing this information, because it truly is mainstream health now to talk about iron overload. It's getting the most press. People are believing it. And there's this other side that iron deficiency exists as well. And it's Caitlyn's opinion and mine as well that iron deficiency is more prevalent than iron overload. So check out the Iron Protocol on Facebook. She has it laid out really well there with the modules where you can just go through and you don't have to do a ton of research and ask a bunch of questions. You could just follow the instructions there, and it's a place to start. I really liked Caitlyn's point that the benefits of supplementing iron outweigh the risks in the context of feeding certain bacteria, parasites, and viruses. I'm a huge fan of the Pearl M from Resonant Light. That's Royal Rife frequency generator machine. I've been using that every night, and that's incredible for pathogens. So I think people have this mentality like they have to stop feeding them, never eat sushi again because they might swallow a parasite egg. I think that's the wrong way about it. I think we have to live our life, and then we have all these tools that we can use to mitigate. I think a lot of the people saying you should never supplement iron today don't understand the debilitating nature of iron deficiency, where maybe a woman's so fatigued that she can barely get out of bed in the morning. If she can supplement some iron or get an infusion or whatever works for her, get some more energy, get some more brain power, have more energy to research more solutions, go for more treatments. I think that's a huge benefit, to be able to get out of that paralyzed state where you're just immobile. So like every supplement, it's a tool to use strategically at the right time. And I think the idea is to not supplement iron forever, but in a lot of cases, Caitlyn has seen it save lives. So once again, that's the Iron Protocol on Facebook, and then she's on Instagram as well. My website is matt-blackburn.com. You could see all of my recommended products, my CLF protocol, which stands for calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. Those are 3 accumulations over time that lead to accelerated aging and disease. So my protocol lays out the solutions that I've found to help with that over the years. And a heads up, starting July 1st through the 10th, Blue Shield is having a 4th of July sale. So if you use the discount code Blackburn, you'll save 18% site-wide. And they're actually in the process of doing a pilot study on the Blue Shield EMF protection scalar devices. I'm a huge fan. I've been using them for about 6 years now. I have the cube at my house, and then I don't leave the house without the mobile unit. So I use Blue Shield on top of supplementing vitamin C, magnesium, and vitamin E, which are your nutritional protectors. There's more: copper, zinc from EMFs. But if I had to pick 3, it would be vitamin E, magnesium, and vitamin C. Try this experiment the next time you're staying at a hotel or a resort where there's a lot of Wi-Fi signals and man-made radiation. Take vitamin C every 30 minutes to an hour, just low dose throughout the day, and see if you notice any differences. I know I do whenever I do that. And that's because it's a redox balancer. So ascorbic acid is supporting your redox system. So the EMFs are stripping you of electrons, especially if you're deficient in ascorbate in your tissues. But if you keep ascorbic acid coming in and keep filling your ascorbate reserves, then you have this resistance to the stealing of electrons. My brand is Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. I do sell vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid, with polyphenols. It's the cleanest vitamin C that I've seen on the market. 2 capsules gives you a little over half a gram. And there's a mix of berry polyphenols in there and some bamboo silica. I used to have to get a haircut every 2 to 3 months. And since taking this product, I've had to get a haircut at least once a month. So it's definitely accelerated my hair and nail growth. The water filter should be back in stock in the next few weeks. We're working hard to get that back to you guys. And then our new brain supplement will be released around the 4th of July. So stay tuned on the website and or social media for that. That's a really exciting supplement. So that's it. I'll see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.